with regulation coming in around CSRB, it will apply to medium and large MSPs. Customers will be asking about their MSP about their security and their compliance.
Yep.
It's a strong statement to say all of our customers have this baseline. We obviously can go above and beyond if you need that or you want that, and I can tell you why you should. But having that as a starting point, I think, is really fundamental.
Yeah, no, I think that it's a good way to help partners who aren't necessarily naturally cybersecurity focused to start engaging in more cybersecurity conversations. One of the things I talk about as much in terms of the role of E92 is to enable partners to feel more confident in having cybersecurity conversations. This is a good way for people to kind of get into that who might not necessarily have cyber as their first language. They might be more focused on cloud or Microsoft. It means it's a good entry point to start having those conversations without having to get too technical or too detailed in terms of, or too specific in terms of the conversation, because for any organization those 5 key criteria are going to apply to everybody.
And this is very minimum. It's a very easy conversation to have with the customer. This is the minimum that is recommended and advised. The CEO of NCSC wrote an article a couple of days ago, and one of the recommendations, the very, very bottom line of it, there's about 4 recommendations, was get cyber essentials. So this is what the National Cybersecurity is telling organizations across the UK. So it's much easier to point to that and say, I'm not just telling you this. If you don't believe me, go and look at this website. It will tell you, here's what you should do. This is the minimum. It's a starting point. So it should be a relatively accessible conversation. And MSPs who have looked at the standard will understand all the technical controls in there, how to implement them. And there's economies of scale. Once you've implemented MFA or patch management across one of your clients, you can probably replicate that for the rest of them. So implementing across your whole client base probably easier than doing it on a one-by-one basis as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also kind of having that more positive conversation with your customers is good. But I think we also need to kind of address we need to use bad news in the best possible way. Obviously, we're talking at a time soon after there's been a lot of relatively high-profile attacks. And when we talk about high-profile attacks, that's normally ones where it impacts consumers in their everyday lives and hits BBC News. That doesn't mean that it's the worst attack, but that's just the reality of the news cycle and how it works. And when people can't get their M&S prawn sandwich where they go out to pop out for lunch, that's when people start. But is it important that we kind of make the most of what is obviously a difficult and a complicated situation? Obviously, we wish those organisations all the best in terms of their recovery, but it is an opportunity for us to talk to more organisations about things like supply chain, about having critical kind of cybersecurity controls in place. It's a chance for partners to be able to go out and talk to their customers about, look, you need to make sure you have got these fundamentals in place. Not that those organizations had it, but it's a chance to renew that cybersecurity conversation.
I think a great question for partners to ask their customers right now is, how would you respond if something was to happen?
Yeah.
And let's talk through what role we would play in that. And there's a lot that partners can do to help with incident response, whether it's tabletop exercises. There's a bunch of free resource on the NCSC that you can run with organizations, IT teams. There's board level learning exercises and training as well. There's a huge amount of resource out there to support you in basically helping your customers prepare incident response plans, business continuity, disaster recovery, testing those plans. But starting with the question, what would you do if there was an incident, is something that I think any director of a company right now is looking at and saying, could that happen to us?
Yeah.
Could we be next? I know we're not in retail and I know we're not large, but it seems like a lot of things are happening in a very short space of time. We already know that organizations are concerned about cyber risk. It tops the risk registers. We know that customers choose MSPs for security. Number one reason they also leave currently. And therefore, starting the conversation is being very proactive, because if you don't start it, your customer's probably thinking it. And they're probably like, is my MSP, do they really know what they're doing? Would they really be able to support me? And have they implemented the appropriate controls and governance around our cyber? So if you do one thing after this, go and talk to your customers and ask them that question and see what comes out the back of it, because I'm sure it'll be really interesting discussion around their posture, their readiness. Have they implemented all the controls they should have? Are they properly monitoring and logging their systems? Have they tested their plans? There's so much to do around that.
There is, and that's where the partners can add the most value, because no organisation, obviously some organisations, can barely struggle to have an IT team, let alone dedicated security teams, and obviously you will have the largest kind of organisations in the UK and the banks and what have you who have massive teams, but every organisation has a capacity, and that's where there's a real opportunity, I think, for partners to be able to talk about of being that next step, of talking about what happens when something when something goes wrong, and we can all see that things can go wrong for any reason. Being able to provide that support network and infrastructure and access that partners then have to a broader ecosystem of distributors, of vendors, of technology, it's a positive conversation to be able to have, because there is that you need to plan for what happens if something goes wrong, and here are all the different ways that we can help, because you don't know what it's going to be.
And I think probably the focus there is on helping them to prepare rather than post-incident response.
Yeah.
And some partners may get a bit concerned, like, well, I'm not sure how to deal with a cyber incident, forensics, talking to regulators, etc. And I don't think that's where MSPs need to go in order to solve for their clients' challenges and business outcomes. And I think this is where insurance can play an increasingly vital role. And interestingly, of the three large name brand retailers, so you've got M&S, Co-op and Harrods. Only M&S had cyber insurance, widely published. 100 million was their policy. Total damage is currently 300 mil plus, so 200 mil off their bottom line. The other two didn't have insurance. And that it's not just paying for the financial bit. I actually think for most organizations, the value is in the instant response. If you're a small or medium-sized organization in particular, the single most important thing the insurer can provide you is that emergency line. When something goes wrong, you can pick up the phone 24/7 with any of the insurers, including the insurance we offer through CyberSmart. You're able to pick up that phone line and speak to someone who knows how to deal with a cyber incident.
Yeah.
And they've dealt with them, hundreds of them before. They know how to negotiate, if necessary, with bad actors, people that are asking for demands, or even to restore your systems or to tell you on the next steps. So I think that element of the cyber insurance, MSPs obviously are rightfully wary of talking about cyber insurance, advising on it on the risk of falling foul of regulation around selling insurance. However, I think explaining that there is incident response included in the policy, and that could be a helpful lifeline for them if they did come under attack, or when they do come under attack, is an important element to call out in any insurance product.
Yeah, it's an interesting one that I think that maybe, our partner's not kind of confident enough talking about cyber insurance, because it's often viewed as being like, kind of when it started coming on, it was like, well, here's an alternative. Well, it's obviously, it's not an alternative. It's not a, you can have that, or you can have your cybersecurity budget and the technology. Obviously you need to have both, but it feels like something that some organizations do, some don't, but it's a fallback. It's just obviously it is an element of worst case scenario, but it's not something that would be part of your strategy. But actually, as you say, from an incident response, do we need to read, as a kind of partner community, do we need to reevaluate how cyber insurance fits within an organization's posture?
I think yes is the short answer. The concern is usually around one, I might not be able to answer these questions. Cyber insurance products can be complex.
Yeah.
And two, I don't want to fall in a conversation where I'm advising on a policy or coverage or limits, and therefore there's a healthy degree of skepticism towards it. Talking about some of the benefits that insurance, regardless of where they go, what coverage they get or limits, can be helpful, especially when you're talking about the value that incident response can bring, that it does fit as part of a broader risk management posture. Just as a business would implement locks on their doors, they will also take out burglary insurance in case someone breaks those locks. So cyber is a relatively new risk area for organizations and boards to grapple with relative to other financial risk, even property. And so helping organizations to understand that the two go hand, where ISO 27001 certified, it's great. We're also Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus. We have a lot of other frameworks as well, yet we still have cyber insurance. And that's because it's part of our risk management posture. It's not because we should swap one for the other. It's because if something does happen, we need that support. We're going to need someone to help us to deal with the incident to make sure that we can contain it, minimize the impact, and therefore help us to sustain our business and achieve our objectives of resilience, essentially. And just as you wouldn't say, well, we've bought some really good locks, so we'll just skip our insurance for this year, you shouldn't say it about cyber insurance either.
Yeah, and actually it's a good way of making sure that cyber insurance, that when partners are talking about that, is part of a business resilience and continuity rather than just being a technological discussion.
And the starting point, I think this is massively understated, is partners should practice what they preach. Go and get Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus, get your own insurance, and you can at least talk from your perspective. You're not advising, but you say, we have insurance, we have Cyber Essentials as well, because we want to do the best for our own security and demonstrate that to our customers. And I think talking about what you do for your own organization is probably far easier and less risky than falling into a conversation about advising.
Yes, and sharing kind of, sharing best practice, sharing examples of what else they've done. I think that your example of saying, well, we have a minimum benchmark if we don't take on customers unless they've got Cyber Essentials as an absolute kind of baseline, I think is really good, because you're coming from a position of talking about the positive and what other organisations have done from a good perspective, rather than just talking about levels of support or what you have to do or worst case scenarios, which is, that's always one of the challenges within cybersecurity, is always making sure that we're trying to have a positive conversation rather than going down the whole FUD route, which is easy to do.
Yeah, if you go to RSA, I wasn't there this year, but when I've previously gone, you've got giant posters saying it takes a lifetime to build your career and 60 seconds to lose it, aimed at CISOs.
Yeah,
and that isn't helpful. It might cause a reaction, knee jerk, and you might get someone to approve the budget for the year. It's really not helpful in changing security behaviors, building a culture, seeing this as an investment in the resilience of the organization. So all those behavioral change elements, I think, come from educating, supporting your customer, starting like we talked about with the what would you do if this was to happen to you.
Yeah.
Starting with that perspective, you can also say you could be next, but that's it's really not going to get people to open their minds to what's possible. It's not going to get their board to engage with the IT and security function with the MSP, and that's what you really need, is to win the hearts and minds at that level.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about kind of regulation and compliance, and mostly from a UK perspective, but obviously, there are broader ones as well, and there's NIS2 and there's DORA from an EU perspective, and a lot of organisations, obviously plenty of kind of small businesses especially, might just be UK focused, but you only need to have one organisation in the EU that you trade with for then you to become become relevant to you if you fit with under the criteria. It's obviously an important step now that the UK and that post-Brexit still has alignment. And again, from a broader perspective, how important is that to make sure that there are kind of more global kind of connections or kind of complements in terms of those kind of either frameworks or regulation, to make sure that, because it is a global digital economy, no country is digitally an island, even if we are kind of physically. There is so much integration, and especially from a digital perspective and data centers and everything. What's your view in terms of where there is commonality across regions and countries? So
my dim view is that there's way too much sovereignty when it comes to frameworks and regulations, and there's the old cartoons where you're like, there's too many frameworks, I know what we'll do, we'll create a new one. And that's like lots of countries, including the UK, are doing that. Cyber Essentials, great framework, isn't adopted outside the UK. Funny enough, Singapore has a standard called Cyber Essentials, but it's not the same framework.
Right.
And Canada launched a similar one. So how do we create more alignment between frameworks, or at least how do we ensure alignment between the existing frameworks that are being created? I think that's something that a lot of organizations are focused on. It can increase the compliance burdens without increasing the business benefits. So needing to comply with 6 different standards for different regions, and some of them may even differ in things like incident reporting guidelines or timelines that you need to meet might be different for the EU than the UK, for example. So having to map all that and understand it is going to increase the burden on organizations from a compliance perspective. So whatever we can do to help to harmonize that, make that simpler. For example, with NIS2, ENISA has recommended ISO as a good guideline, or to use an internationally recognized and established framework is the language they use, and referencing specific parts of ISO. So I think that's helpful. Wherever we can utilize existing frameworks, we've seen it with Defense Cyber Certification, or DCC, I mentioned earlier, they're using Cyber Essentials baseline. I think that's great. If the Cybersecurity Resilience Bill, or CSRB, sorry with all the acronyms, but if the new bill uses CAF or the Cyber Assessment Framework, that's great, because organizations that have already been working towards those principles can apply them. So I think it's definitely an important role of regulators to think about what already exists in the market. Is there something that's equivalent or close enough? Because that's going to streamline the ability for organizations to meet those requirements. When banks ask for their suppliers to do Cyber Essentials, great, it's an established framework. It's been around for 10 years. So, and it has a prescriptive level that needs to be met. And we know the benefits. So there's a lot, I think, that can be leveraged from existing stuff rather than creating new.
Yeah. But one thing we kind of touched on that we'll probably get onto, and I think this is probably a good point, ever important subject of AI and potentially regulation around that as well. It's a massive challenge for organisations. Both in terms of kind of businesses who are building out AI, and now anyone can kind of create their own LLM to an extent, and then where you're potentially seeing regulation is going to need to come, and where that's going to need to interact from a cybersecurity perspective, because AI is now everywhere. It's maybe not ubiquitous, but it's gone so quickly from being a tool that some organizations use, and especially kind of cybersecurity in terms of kind of machine learning and stuff like that, but now it's just part of workflows. Just kind of, in such a short space of time, it's become embedded in our everyday. What's your view in terms of where any potential kind of AI, more or greater AI regulation can interact with the cybersecurity side?
There are many facets to this. So trying to regulate the builders of AI, the AI companies, I think is like trying to nail jelly to a wall. Yep. Context is so important. You might be writing a persuasive marketing email, or you might be writing a phishing campaign, and without knowing your intent and the context behind that, it's almost impossible, if not impossible, for a model to understand whether they should allow or deny that request. And regardless, there will be another model that's open source that you can use to achieve the same aim. I think trying to regulate safety of models is a near impossible task. So that's one aspect to it. Second is organizations' use and adoption of AI and how regulated that is. And broadly speaking, it's like any other technology. Like we use cloud file sharing services, whether it's OneDrive or Google Drive, and you're uploading stuff. And we expect those organizations to take care of that data, that it stays our data and doesn't get shared. And so there's definitely a piece around there to make sure that organizations understand the risks of sharing data with the cloud, the risks of people being exposed to data they shouldn't within the organization. But again, these are not new problems like access control. Often organizations, when they do an audit, see a lot of gaps within there. You've put a sensitive financial document on the everyone drive. Things like that happen. So making sure that the right people can access the right resources is going to be a challenge. The flip side, I think, whenever we talk about AI, is it can also be used for good. It can help us to quickly categorize all our data and understand what is being shared across the organization. Whereas before, you'd have to look through manually, or at least in some manual way, going through troves of data and trying to understand what's right, what's not. And AI can help us in those use cases to make us more efficient. It can help to automate some of the work processes around making sure people have the appropriate access to resources. It can streamline security tasks, IT tasks. Think about agentic AI. It can help with things like tickets. And a lot of partners are thinking how they can use, not necessarily generative AI. If they are using it, that's great. Agentic AI is where MSP can really supercharge their organization when it comes to efficiency, because it's where you can add an additional 10 members of staff without adding an additional 10 members of staff. And we haven't seen the huge loss of jobs that maybe some of the doomsday predictors. In fact, we've seen organizations adopting it, have more productivity and keeping their staff and making them more productive. Just before we started, we talked about co-pilots. That's kind of my view of where they're most effective now. And I think even when we talk about agentic AI, it's still most effective use cases have a human in the loop. So you're supervising a process, you're reviewing some of the outputs at some stages. They're helping triage things like security alerts in a SOC. So these can be incredibly useful and adopted. I know it wasn't quite your question.
Oh, no. Absolutely.
But I think it's there's so many facets of AI and regulation. I think regulation will never be able to catch up with our use cases around, from an organization perspective. I think they will struggle to get a handle on model safety. I think the geopolitical tension around AI models and, again, sovereignty is going to play a factor in what models we can and can't use within our organizations and economies too. So there's a lot to unpack, I guess.
Yeah.
Probably another podcast worth.
It probably is. But I think in any case, that the easiest way that organizations need to think about it probably is just viewing it as another tool and applying the same fundamental principles that you'd apply to that tool as you would any other piece of software.
I think that's a great starting point.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're kind of coming up to the top of the episode now. So in terms of kind of where you see, obviously the bill from a UK cybersecurity and resilience will be kind of coming out shortly. So obviously there's going to be a lot of organisations going to be ready for that, and then there's also probably going to be a lot of change from a partner perspective. What would you say in terms of kind of what they should start doing in terms of being able to improve their competitiveness and looking for the opportunity and where they'll be able to add most value to their customers as all these changes come in?
So firstly, have a look at what's in the bill and the requirements. So understand if you fall in scope, you should start preparing now.
Yep.
This is currently going through Parliament, legislation possibly next year, maybe by the end of this year. So understand the requirements, what you need to do, what your gap on your plan to close those gaps looks like, assuming you have stuff to do. In any case, you will need to have things like instant responses tested, make sure that's aligned with the requirements. So do that for your customers where you think they may be in scope as well. So critical national infrastructure, review the new list of entities that are covered under legislation as well. I think that's probably the first, is to understand like where you sit currently. Yeah. Secondly, I did take a structured approach, so using the cyber assessment framework, or CAF, some incredible resources freely available on the NCSC's website. From level 0, what is CAF? How can it help? Yep. What are the principles? All the way through to demonstrating your assurance against the framework and demonstrate your requirements for the legislation. So use CAF as a really good baseline, structured approach, very likely to be the demonstrable evidence you can have to meet the requirements. Those are probably the first 2 steps I would take as a partner today.
Yeah. Okay. And then in terms of your view on kind of how this is going to kind of positively impact, do you think it's going to drive up, more organisations, definitely having a better cybersecurity posture, but also them beginning to, another increase in things like kind of cyber essentials and, helping, really lift the levels of cybersecurity posture, across, SMBs in kind of particular?
It will, I guess. The question is it enough, and will we see widespread adoption and a shift in behaviour and attitudes towards cybersecurity? And that I'm probably a little bit more reserved on. You mentioned earlier GDPR, lots of fanfare. You look at the search traffic around GDPR and it's this huge spike and then just completely drops off. A lot of organisations worried, they tried to do some stuff, ask someone 6 months later and they're probably, oh, okay, well, the ICO hasn't knocked on my door yet, so I think I'm good. So I'm concerned that it won't lead to systemic change across organizations, society. And just coming back to a point I made earlier, partners can be the driving force and change of the UK becoming a more secure digital ecosystem. We can set the example with the customers we work with. If we can say, this is our baseline, this is what we do, this is what good looks like. And if you don't want that and you don't see the value in it, you can go elsewhere. But that's where the whole industry is moving. Work with medium or large MSP, this is what they're going to be expecting their customers to do. So I think that is probably more exciting from my perspective, is partners can be the conduit to the change if they take this, they adopt it, they run with it for themselves, and they preach that as best practice to their clients. Yeah,
definitely a huge opportunity for them. And as you say, from a competitive differentiation perspective, this is where they can, definitely do it. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time and all your insights. Thanks everybody for watching. Don't forget to look out for the next episode that'll be dropping on your podcast or YouTube feeds. Other than that, thank you very much for your time, Jamie. Once again, thank you very much, and have a great day.